Okay, the last part we need to look at are the exchanges and the new slave trade and the trade that's going to go on between the Americas, Europe, and Africa. Okay, so when we set this up, it's going to be in a triangular trade shape with Europe at the top, Africa down on the lower right hand side, the Americas over the lower left hand side, and of course back to Europe. Alright, and it's going to be a movement of goods in this triangular trade fashion. Shortest trip between Europe and Africa, longest trip between Africa and the Americas, and then another short trip returning from Americas back to Europe. And the goods that are going to be moved around this triangular trade are very important. Obviously, by looking at the name, the slaves are going to be the biggest part of this trade that is going to be moved around. Okay, so going from Europe to Africa are manufactured goods. Guns, clothing, furniture, money. I say cash, really it's gold. Rum is going to be a big one that's going to move from Europe into Africa. In exchange for that, those manufactured goods, the African chiefs and other African slave traders are going to send slaves as labor to the Americas to make up for the lack of labor, obviously, with the indigenous. So the slave labor is going to go to the Americas, and this will be called the Middle Passage. This will be the longest part of the trip. This will be the hardest part of the trip. Slaves will be packed in very tightly on slave ships, left below deck for a week at a time, chained to one another, and this is after being moved possibly up to 300 miles of travel to be loaded onto a ship and sold in the Americas for varying prices depending on whether or not you are a healthy male or a healthy female, your size, your ability to work, and what you're needed for. And a lot of times families are going to be broken up because of the slave trade back in the Americas. It's going to become very prominent, obviously, in the North American colonies, the cotton producing and tobacco producing colonies of North America, the sugar producing and tobacco producing colonies of the Caribbean and South America, which will be the most violent and the worst of the plantations. North American slavery, and take this as what it is mild compared to what is going to happen in the Caribbean islands and in South America. Not saying taking anything away from slavery or how terrible it was, but it's not like what they were doing on the sugar plantations of the Caribbean. In exchange, you have natural resources being moved from the Americas to Europe, and this is in the form of sugar, tobacco, gold, cotton. These goods are moving into Europe, and you're starting to see this exchange kind of moving around in this triangular pattern across the Atlantic. It's going to become very profitable for those countries involved: the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, the English. You know, they don't have to rely on the Muslim traders. They don't have to rely on the Indian Ocean trade basin. However, there are connections into Asia with the goods that are found here as well. All right, which leads to the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange was a global exchange of goods that started with Columbus. Okay, the movement of goods after Columbus leaves the New World in 1492, 1493, the exchange of goods that are going back and forth becomes enormous. Okay, you can look at all the different goods that are found here. What was in the New World headed back to the Old World, and vice versa. You have, major crops that are used today: corn, potatoes, tomatoes. It's amazing to think that tomatoes were not in Italy before this, and how valuable tomatoes are to that culture. Chocolate, vanilla, tobacco, yada, yada, yada. Of course, you have the domesticated animals, farm animals of the Old World coming into the New World, and its value and importance there. Okay, and saying that your global population is going to explode. People are going to begin to move into the colonies, and the populations of those colonial towns and smaller cities are going to get huge. So the population explodes, and you start to see the different population hierarchies, like I explained to you in the last video, that you see amongst the Spanish. You have the commercial revolution. This is really the point where capitalism is going to boom. It's going to be much different than the commercial revolution of the Middle Age guilds. In this case, it's going to be establishment of monopolies. Business is really taking over in the form of government. Even though government is really in control, they're not in control by what the business is doing. In this free market, free-wielding capitalism that's going to happen, where profits are going to be huge, kind of focusing on what the Dutch had done with their Dutch East India trading posts, becomes revolutionary, and the amount of money that's going to be made and traded is going to be remarkable. All right, you do have inflation again. That's going to be an issue there, rise in prices, but the value in the money. But that's not going to be the only thing. Capitalism is going to boom. You're looking at like favorable balances of trade where people are trying to export more than they import. Businesses are owned privately. The money is being made by people as they move into the colonies. The British East India Company, the British West India Company compete with the Dutch. You have the joint stock companies in Virginia. All these different businesses can be established around the local resources and make people very, very, very wealthy, which is going to help in the long run, especially with American independence. It's going to help with the revolutions in France. It's going to help with the revolutions in Haiti and the movements in the Americas too, because wealthy people are going to be educated based on their ownership of land in this capitalism that has been created. And normally with capitalism, you have what are called entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs are the people who take the risks. They're the ones who are investing the capital and trying to make money off of what their investments are. They may get investors from the outside areas to help them. Of course, they'll pay back those loans with a little bit of interest, but capitalism is really going to boom here during this time period. All right, you have this idea of mercantilism, which is more of a governmental idea, strengthening national colonies through colonization, going and creating colonies for the sole purpose of obtaining their natural resources. That is what mercantilism is, and what that'll do is that'll expand empires all over the world, but it also creates colonies that are going to be very tied to their home country. It's going to be very, very important as we move forward because of this idea of colonization and mercantilism. You're going to have revolt and rebellion. And then tariffs, tax on imports. This is where countries are going to try to encourage people to buy from their own and not to buy from others. That would make their countries more profitable. So creating a tariff will raise the price, forcing people to buy a product that might be owned by their own country, and that becomes a major part of the trade aspect today. It's still right then, it's still a major part of the trade aspect as we see it today. Okay, so understand that the economies are going to boom, and as we move forward into the next sets of time periods, which is going to be revolution, rebellion, industrialization, it's all going to be based on this capitalistic market. It's really going to start with the obtaining of resources because of Columbus's movement. So you can see one simple mistake of going west turns into this major global boom that we are finding here today.